He slapped me right there in the middle of the courtroom in front of my child, the cameras, and the law he was sworn to uphold. Not because I shouted, not because I resisted, but because I dared to speak, because I was a black mother demanding to be heard. That single moment of brutality from Judge Ronald Whitaker didn't just bruise my face, it exposed a system built on silence, fear, and unchecked power. But what they didn't know was that I wouldn't stay silent, and I wasn't alone. He slapped me. Right there, in front of everyone. His hand, thick and pale, cracked against my face like a whip, snapping my head to the side with such force that the gasps in the courtroom felt like an explosion behind me. I wasn't screaming. I didn't cry. But I remember the way my son looked at me from the back bench. Eyes wide mouth open, his little hands clenched so tightly they trembled. All I'd done was speak. All I said was, "Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm a mother," and then it came. That slap. Because I dared to defend myself. Because I was a black woman, standing on the wrong side of power. He stood above me. Judge Ronald Whitaker, robed in black like a god among mortals. His face unmoved, his gavel resting like a threat. He didn't flinch, didn't apologize. His voice echoed with venom, contempt of court. That was all. And behind him, the bailiffs stood frozen, not from surprise, no, but from complicity, as if they'd seen this before, as if they'd been trained not to move. And somewhere near the exit, a white woman in a pearl necklace clapped softly before catching herself. "I am Camille Justice Langford, 36, single mother, former paralegal. And I never wanted this fight. I never dreamed of standing in that courtroom trembling not from guilt, but from the fury of a woman being humiliated by the very system she once served." I had worn my best blazer, navy blue with the little pin my mother gave me before she passed, because I believed in dignity. I believed in the law. I believed if I just showed up, told the truth, asked for fairness, I would be heard. But they never planned to hear me. The charge was simple failure to pay a traffic citation that had ballooned into a bench warrant. What wasn't simple was how my license had been suspended because the city misplaced a payment, my payment. Or how I'd been pulled over just one block from my home, pulled out of my car in front of my son handcuffed on the sidewalk while neighbors watched. The real crime wasn't my driving. It was my defiance, my refusal to stay in the place they'd assigned me. Judge Whitaker wasn't new to this. He was a legend in Jefferson County. They said he brought discipline to a chaotic court. What they meant was he ruled like a tyrant. Lawyers feared him. DAs protected him. Reporters praised his efficiency, but dared not challenge his decisions. And for people like me, black, female, single-tired, we weren't even names in his court. We were paperwork, fines, contempt citations. He saw me not as a mother, but as a problem. They gave me a court-appointed attorney who hadn't even read my file. She yawned as I explained my case, told me to just pay the fine, even though it would mean I couldn't afford rent. But when I tried to explain that, when I stood in that courtroom and said, "Your Honor, I respectfully ask for community service," that's when he rose from his chair. That's when the heat shifted. That's when he walked toward me, each step echoing like a threat. I thought he would lecture me. I thought he'd call me insolent. I never thought he would strike me. But he did, and no one stopped him. For a moment there was silence. A suffocating silence, as if the air itself was trying to understand what had just happened. And then slowly I turned my head back to face him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give him that. My cheek burned. My ears rang. But my voice didn't shake. "You don't get to silence me," I whispered. His eyes narrowed, his lips curled with disgust, and he turned back to his bench, smug and certain he had broken me. But he hadn't. Not even close. I wasn't always this woman. I wasn't born angry. I wasn't raised to rebel. I was the girl who brought extra pencils to class, who volunteered to read out loud, who stayed after school to help others understand the Constitution even when it didn't protect me. I believed in systems, in fairness, in patience. That's why I became a paralegal in the first place. That's why I stayed late every night at Harmon and West, while my son Malachi slept in the break room with a coloring book and juice box. Because I thought the law could be kind if you worked hard enough to deserve it. But no amount of work prepared me for life after losing my job. It started with the firm merging, then downsizing, then politely letting me go with a severance check that disappeared in rent and daycare fees. I applied for new positions even outside the legal field, but the moment employers saw single mother or gap in employment or Jefferson County address, the doors shut. Malachi's asthma got worse, his prescriptions more expensive, and soon the rent ran late. The car payment followed. I took jobs at night waitressing, cleaning anything to survive. But survival came with parking tickets, missed deadlines, and one day, a busted taillight that spiraled into the court date that changed everything. That morning, I had braided Malachi's hair myself. He was 7, too young to see his mother in handcuffs, but old enough to know something was wrong. When I told him I'll only be inside for a few minutes, I meant it. I wore my heels, my blazer, and foolish clinging hope that if I just explained, if I just showed respect, the system would meet me halfway. Instead, I was called belligerent. Instead, I was slapped, and outside the courtroom, the world kept turning. My court-appointed lawyer disappeared like a ghost. The bailiff pretended not to have seen anything, and Malachi, sweet Malachi, had to be consoled by a clerk who gave him candy to stop his tears. I walked out of that courthouse with a red mark on my face and a citation for contempt. But worse than all of that was the silence. The silence of every person in that room who saw violence unfold and chose comfort over justice. Not a single hand reached for mine, not one, until I met her. Her name was Dawn Weaver, 48. A court stenographer with a sharp jaw and sharper eyes. She found me in the hallway, clutching Malachi's hand, trying to breathe. She didn't say much, just handed me a napkin with an address. "Come by tomorrow. 8 p.m. It's time someone told the truth." I didn't know what she meant then. I didn't trust it either. But something in her gaze, tired, defiant, made me curious. That night I kissed Malachi goodnight and walked through the rain to the address. It wasn't a law office. It was a small apartment above a laundromat. Inside, 3 women sat around a kitchen table strewn with documents, photos, flash drives. They had all been slapped, not just physically, but legally. Each one of them had been dragged through Judge Whitaker's courtroom. Each one humiliated, threatened, silenced. There was Janine, who lost custody of her kids because she raised her voice. There was Tanya, whose disabled brother was sentenced without translation. And then there was Rosa, who filmed her hearing and was jailed for contempt. They called themselves the Silenced, and I was one of them now. We stayed up all night, sharing stories, swapping documents, building something I hadn't felt in years, solidarity. They'd been collecting testimonies. Dawn had been saving transcripts, logging irregularities. They weren't just grieving, they were preparing. A reckoning was coming, and now I was part of it. But I still wasn't ready. The next day, CPS came to my apartment. An anonymous report had been filed. They claimed I was unstable, that Malachi was in danger. They cited my contempt citation as evidence. And suddenly, the courtroom slap became a weapon not just against me, but against my family. I had 2 weeks to prove myself or they'd remove him. That was the moment I stopped being scared, because when they come for your child, fear dies. And fury is born. I began documenting everything. I recorded every call, saved every email, printed every receipt. I contacted former clients, legal aid volunteers, anyone who would speak on the record. I spent nights scanning files, building timelines, filing FOIA requests. And while Malachi slept, I whispered promises to the darkness. They won't take you. I swear it. And the more I dug, the worse it got. Judge Whitaker had sealed dozens of records. He'd fast-tracked bench warrants, inflated fines, and refused plea deals to single mothers and undocumented workers. He was a predator in robes, and the courthouse was his hunting ground. And nobody, not the DA, not the sheriff, not the mayor, said a word, because he made the system run on time. But now I had names, faces, proof, and I had Dawn. We met in secret. We wrote everything by hand. We used code names and burner phones, because we knew if Whitaker even suspected what we were doing, he'd bury us, literally or legally. And yet every risk made me bolder. Every act of defiance felt like reclaiming a piece of my voice. I was no longer Camille the paralegal. I was Camille the witness. Camille the mother. Camille the storm they never saw coming. And then the twist arrived. Rosa found something buried in an old hard drive. A video. Grainy but clear. Judge Whitaker in chambers screaming at a clerk, calling her the N-word, throwing a folder across the room. It had been leaked years ago, suppressed, forgotten. But now we had it. We had the truth. I stared at that footage for hours, and I knew what had to happen next. Not quietly, not secretly, but publicly, in a courtroom, his courtroom, where it all began. They thought I had gone away, that I would shrink, hide, that the slap had silenced me for good. And for a few days it did. I stayed quiet. I nodded in courtrooms. I smiled at the social worker assigned to evaluate Malachi's home environment. I paid parking tickets I didn't owe. I wore flats instead of heels so I wouldn't look defensive. I played the part of the docile black mother who had learned her lesson. But behind that quiet smile a storm was building. I wasn't alone anymore. Every night after Malachi fell asleep, I slipped out with Dawn to meet in church basements, diners with flickering lights, or even the back room of a barber shop. Our group, the Silenced, had grown. Each of us had lost something to Judge Whitaker: time, dignity, family safety. But what we were gaining now was fire and strategy. It was Rosa who said it best one night as she flipped through a binder filled with case notes. "This isn't just about justice," she murmured. "It's about exposing how many people stood by and watched while it happened." Because Whitaker didn't slap me in secret. He slapped me in front of a courtroom filled with employees, officers, lawyers, and no one said a word. They were all complicit, so we began to chart every name, every clerk who misfiled documents, every bailiff who escorted screaming mothers out in handcuffs, every child taken without appeal, every fine increased without explanation. Dawn showed us how to pull public salary records. Janine showed us how to track pension contributions. Tanya dug into campaign finance disclosures. It was like peeling wallpaper in an old house behind every surface we found rot. But it wasn't enough to know. We needed to move, and I knew the first place to start. I called Marcus Bell, an old colleague from Harmon and West, now working pro bono with the Civil Rights Legal Collective. He remembered me barely, but enough to listen when I told him I had something big. At first, he was skeptical. "Camille," he said, "you don't take down a judge without a war chest and a media firestorm." I told him I already had both. He agreed to meet. When he saw the video of Whitaker yelling racial slurs in chambers, he leaned back in his seat and whispered, "Holy sh..." When I laid out the pattern of misconduct, cross-referenced transcripts, sealed records, unexplained jailings, his face changed. This wasn't outrage anymore. It was strategy, legal possibility. He asked one question: "Can you testify?" I said yes, but not yet. I had one more card to play. There was a reporter, Aaliyah Kinley, from Channel 8 News. I'd seen her once, standing outside City Hall during a police brutality protest. Her voice steady while tear gas swirled behind her. She didn't chase car crashes or bake sales. She chased truth. So I waited outside the studio holding nothing but a flash drive and a printed transcript of my hearing. When I handed it to her, I said, "You can ignore this, or you can follow it all the way down. But either way, you'll remember my name." She called 2 hours later. She had watched the video, read the transcript, and she wanted to meet on camera. "No edits," I said. "No cropping my rage to make me palatable. I'm not here to be polite anymore." She nodded. We met on the courthouse steps, the same ones I'd climbed the day of the slap, trembling alone. But now I stood taller. Not because the pain was gone, but because the truth was too loud to hide. Her camera crew set up quietly. She mic'd me herself. And then she asked, "What do you want people to know?" I looked straight into the lens. That the law isn't broken, it's being weaponized. That silence in the face of abuse is complicity. That a judge slapped me in the face in front of my child, and the only thing more painful than the strike was the sound of nothing after. The piece aired that night. They didn't bleep anything. They didn't blur my face, and by morning it had been shared by millions. The outrage came fast. Hashtags, street protests. A petition calling for Whitaker's removal hit 200,000 signatures in under 48 hours. Lawyers started sharing stories anonymously. Former clerks came forward. And then, like a crack in a dam, the system began to leak. The Office of Judicial Oversight, long considered toothless, announced a formal inquiry. Judge Whitaker said nothing, but I knew he was watching. 2 days later, I received a court summons to appear again before Whitaker, this time not as a defendant, but as a witness in an internal hearing. I smiled when I read it, because I knew exactly what was coming, and I was ready. I wore my blazer again, the same one as before, but this time with no makeup to hide the scar that hadn't fully faded on my cheek. Malachi held my hand as we walked past cameras, protest signs, and news vans. When a reporter asked how I felt, I said, "Unbreakable." Inside the courthouse, I saw fear in the eyes that once looked past me. Clerks straightened their backs. Bailiffs avoided my gaze. Even the court reporter looked ashamed, because now they knew I wasn't just Camille. I was the storm, and I had only just begun. The summons said 10 warrants a.m., but I arrived at 8:00. I needed to see it empty, the courtroom that once swallowed my dignity. I needed to reclaim it. The rows of oak benches sat quiet, as if bracing for what was coming. I ran my fingers across the table where I once begged for mercy, and received a slap instead. But this time I wasn't begging. I was testifying. I was the case. By 9 O's, the hallway buzzed. Protesters, reporters, lawyers with tight jaws and wary eyes. Inside, court officials prepared documents without speaking, as if afraid their whispers might reach Whitaker's ears. I saw Marcus Bell at the back, nodding silently to me. He wore no tie, just a black shirt, and a folder marked with bold red tabs. Aaliyah stood beside him, her camera crew already rolling. I could feel the weight of a nation watching. Then he entered, Judge Ronald Whitaker, in full robe, chin high, as if nothing had changed. But something had. He walked slower. His eyes darted more. And for the first time there was no bailiff to announce him. Just the uncomfortable shuffling of a room that had once stood for him now simply endured him. He sat, cleared his throat. "Camille Langford," he said, "as if we were strangers, you may begin." I stood. No trembling, no blinking. "My name is Camille Langford. I was a paralegal for 9 years. I am a mother. And I was assaulted by this judge in this courtroom while trying to speak in defense of my son and myself. I have come here today not to accuse, but to expose." Gasps. Pens froze mid-sentence. And Whitaker smirked. He leaned back, eyes narrowing like a serpent preparing to strike. "Miss Langford, this is a judicial review hearing, not a circus. Stick to facts." I didn't flinch. "The fact is, you struck me, Your Honor. On camera, in front of my child. I was held in contempt for speaking, not screaming, not threatening, but speaking. And you retaliated with violence." He slammed his gavel once. Silence or removal. And just like that I saw it. His plan. This wasn't a trial. It was a trap. He wanted me angry. Loud. Emotional. He wanted me to explode so he could twist it, brand me unstable, and discredit everything I had worked for. I saw it in his eyes, the pleasure he took in baiting black women into breaking just to claim their ruin was orderly justice. So I inhaled, exhaled, and turned. "To the court," I said, "to the observers, the officials, the cameras, I offer evidence." Marcus stood, handed me the folder. Inside, transcripts, complaints, sealed orders, and the video. I placed each on the podium. Here is a sealed case from 2017. A woman jailed for 4 months over a noise complaint. No lawyer present. No record of release terms. Here is testimony from a clerk who heard the N-word shouted in chambers. And here is the footage. I gestured. The screen flickered. There he was, younger but unmistakable Judge Whitaker, calling a clerk useless black trash while throwing a folder. You could hear the fear in the woman's breathing. You could hear his contempt loud and clear. Silence. And then the real twist began. Because Whitaker didn't deny it, he laughed. "Inappropriate language. Long ago. I've been disciplined privately. That's not what this hearing is about." My jaw clenched. Then, "What is this hearing about, Your Honor?" He stood, removed his robe. Underneath, a crisp white suit, polished buttons, and a wireless mic clipped discreetly to his collar. "This hearing," he said coldly, "is about a coordinated smear campaign. A personal vendetta by a disgruntled woman who resents authority." Gasps again. He turned to the gallery. She was arrested for legitimate legal reasons. She failed to comply with orders. She was defiant, unstable, and now she's manipulating public sympathy for her own crusade. I didn't recognize the courtroom anymore. I recognized a battlefield. And he wasn't done. He pulled out a folder of his own. "In this file," he said with theatrical flair, "are reports filed against Miss Langford by 3 social workers, 2 teachers, and 1 neighbor, all suggesting emotional instability, all claiming potential risk to her child. Lies, manufactured or coerced, but they were timed too perfectly, too neatly. The system was shielding itself. Closing ranks, I felt my knees weaken. But then I looked to the back row. Malachi, sitting beside Aaliyah. His small hands folded, his face brave. And I remembered. They may try to paint me as broken, but I was never broken. I was building. I stepped forward. "You want to accuse me, Judge Whitaker," I said, voice firm. "Then let's put both files on the table. Mine and yours. Let the people see which story holds. Let them see who the real danger is." The court officers shifted. The oversight committee members whispered among themselves. Even the security guards looked unsure, and then a woman stood. Gray hair, dark blue blazer. "Committee calls for recess. All evidence to be reviewed in chambers. Public testimony to continue after adjournment." Gavels strike. Court dismissed. But not over. Outside, the press swarmed. Some believed me. Some doubted. But all listened. And that was the beginning of what scared him most, because his power thrived in silence, and I had shattered it. The storm didn't end when the courtroom cleared. It followed me home. That night, the power in my apartment was cut. No warning, just darkness. I lit candles while Malachi did his homework on the floor, asking, "Did we forget to pay again?" "Mommy, I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth, that sometimes truth itself is expensive." I sat in the quiet, watching shadows flicker against the walls, feeling like a fugitive in my own home. But I refused to run. The next morning, Child Protective Services returned. They brought a form this time requesting temporary custody pending psychological evaluation. They smiled like assassins. Cold, professional. One of them, a man in khakis with a clipboard, crouched down to Malachi's level and said, "Would you like to come with us for a few days, buddy?" Malachi screamed. I stepped between them. "No, you will not take my son." But they had orders, signed by a judge. Not Whitaker, but someone just like him, someone in the same circle. They moved like they'd done this before. Efficient. I was powerless. They pulled him from my arms. His cries echoed down the stairwell like 1,000 nails driving into my spine. I collapsed on the floor, hands shaking, breath stolen, body frozen. And the worst part, there were neighbors watching. Lights behind curtains. Phones recording. But no one came down. No one asked questions. I was just another black woman losing her child. Another cautionary tale. That night I didn't light candles. I tore them down. I screamed. I threw every file, every binder, every carefully labeled note across the room. Pages scattered like fallen feathers from a wounded bird. For the first time I wondered if they were right. If the system really was invincible. If I had gone too far. I collapsed onto the floor and sobbed until dawn. But then the door knocked. It was Janine. She didn't speak, just stepped over the mess and sat beside me. Behind her came Rosa, then Tanya, then Dawn. One by one they filled my living room with quiet resistance. Rosa picked up the pages. Tanya gathered the USB drives. Dawn put water on the stove. And then Janine said, "They only hit this hard when they know they're losing." They stayed the night. In the morning, I had an inbox full of fire. Aaliyah's piece had gone viral again, but this time because someone leaked the internal memo Judge Whitaker had sent to the Judicial Ethics Board. In it, he described me as a fabricated activist, an opportunist, and an unstable woman with a vendetta. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was that he'd accidentally CC'd the entire media pool. His own words, his own signature, his own undoing. And the country noticed. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about me. It was about a judge abusing power, about a system colluding to destroy a mother, about a child being ripped from his home because his mother dared to speak. Hashtags returned louder this time. Slap of injustice. Camille speaks. Bring Malachi home. Aaliyah interviewed 3 former court clerks on live television. One broke down in tears. Another handed her a folder containing dozens of sealed misconduct complaints, all ignored. And then the phone rang. It was Marcus Bell. "We're ready," he said. "For what?" "For federal court." He had filed a civil rights lawsuit on my behalf. Illegal detainment, judicial abuse, wrongful child separation. The Department of Justice had opened an investigation. And suddenly, Whitaker was no longer untouchable. He was a name under scrutiny, a symbol of a decaying empire. But still, Malachi wasn't home, so I took one final risk. I walked into the courthouse, alone. No cameras, no entourage, just me and a letter. I handed it directly to the judge overseeing Malachi's custody. It wasn't a legal motion. It was a mother's plea, 3 pages, titled simply, "What My Son Deserves." I told them about our bedtime stories, about how he loved planets, about how he believed in me even when the world tried to break me. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize. I wrote with truth, raw, unsanitized, and powerful. The judge read it silently, then said only 2 words, "Thank you." That night, Malachi came home. He ran into my arms, like a shot from a cannon, knocking me backward as he sobbed into my chest. I didn't let go for hours. We lay on the couch in silence, his small body curled against mine, both of us too exhausted to speak. But inside, I was already rebuilding, because they had taken everything, and I was still standing. I had my voice. I had my child. And I had an army of women who would not let me fall again. The courthouse was different now. The same marble floors, the same oak benches. But something in the air had shifted. The building no longer echoed with intimidation, it hummed with reckoning. This wasn't just a local hearing anymore. The Department of Justice had taken over. The Office of Civil Rights sat in the front row. Every news camera from CNN to YouTube bloggers packed the walls. The trial of Judge Ronald Whitaker had begun. But more than that, America was watching a system judge itself. I walked in with Malachi holding my hand. He wore a navy sweater. I wore the blazer again, the same one I'd been slapped in. This time, I left the scar uncovered. It was faint now, but visible, and I wanted it visible. Because healing does not mean forgetting, because some wounds are proof we survived. They called me first. I walked to the stand, swore in, and looked across the courtroom. Whitaker sat beside his defense team, a wall of gray suits and smirking mouths. But he looked smaller now, thinner. He didn't wear his robe, just a dark suit collar stiff like guilt pressing in. The prosecutor's voice was calm. "Miss Langford, please describe in your own words what happened on the day of your contempt citation." I told them everything, not just the slap. I told them about the years of silence, the lost job, the unpaid tickets, the false CPS reports the night without power, the tears Malachi cried when strangers dragged him away. I spoke without rage, without theater, just truth. And in that silence, the courtroom began to shift. The jury looked down. The court clerks began to cry, and then the prosecutor said, "Miss Langford, do you know why Judge Whitaker targeted you specifically?" I hesitated, because this was the twist I hadn't spoken aloud until now. "I believe," I said slowly, "it's because I wasn't the first." But I was the first with a voice loud enough to threaten what he was hiding. She nodded, and pulled up a document on the screen, a financial audit, unsealed just days earlier. The courtroom gasped, because it showed that Whitaker, the same man who fined mothers for missed court dates, jailed teenagers for late fees, had been siphoning off court-ordered fees into a private foundation he controlled. Youth Justice Project, it was called. But there were no youth, no programs, just deposits into his account. Over $4.2 million. I saw it click in real time. This was never just ego. It was greed. It was empire. And we were the bricks he'd stood on to build it. That was when Aaliyah stood, not as a reporter, but as a witness. She had tracked the shell companies, interviewed the former accountant who'd been fired for asking too many questions. Then came Janine. Then Rosa. Then the social worker who finally broke crying on the stand that she was told to file false reports under pressure. Every voice added to the avalanche. And Whitaker, he didn't speak. Not once. He didn't deny. He didn't rise. He simply sat, head lowered, like a statue that had been chipped away until hollow. When the jury returned the recommendation for immediate disbarment and criminal prosecution, the courtroom erupted. Not with applause, not with cheers, with breath, held too long, now finally released. But that wasn't the end, because I wasn't done. I turned to face the courtroom, the nation, the world watching, and I said, "To every woman who's ever been silenced in a courtroom, speak louder. To every black mother who's been branded unstable for defending her child, stand firmer." They didn't just try to take my voice, they tried to erase my son's future. But we are here, and we will not disappear. And then I stepped down. Whitaker was led away in cuffs. The same bailiff who once ignored my pleas now held his arm without eye contact. I watched the man who slapped me vanish behind a courtroom door. But what I remember most was the sound of the latch closing. Finau, echoing and free. The courthouse is quiet now. Not silent the way it was when I was slapped. Not the silence of fear, of complicity, of swallowed injustice. But the quiet of closure of doors shutting on a chapter too long ignored. It's been 6 months since Whitaker was arrested. 3 months since he was indicted on federal corruption charges. And today, for the first time in a long time, I walk past the building without looking away. Malachi is with me. He skips beside me, humming something he learned in science class. He's grown taller, bolder, more curious. He no longer flinches when he sees a police car. He no longer asks if I'm okay every time I step outside. That is what justice gave us. Not wealth, not fame, but peace. The kind you earn. The kind you defend. They offered me money settlements, interviews, even a book deal. I declined most. Because this wasn't about profit. This was about presence. I used what I had to open the Langford Legal Literacy Fund, a small center on the corner of Clay and 7th. There we teach single mothers how to navigate court systems. We help kids file school complaints. We offer workshops called How to Be Loud in the Right Room, because I was once in the wrong room alone and I swore no one else would be. Dawn helps me run it. Janine and Rosa are mentors. Tanya teaches a course on emotional documentation. Aaliyah visits monthly with journalism students who want to tell stories that matter. And Marcus. He left his old firm, started one called Bell and Justice. I guess he found the right name in the end. As for me, I'm not just the woman who got slapped anymore. I'm Camille Langford, mother, builder, survivor. One afternoon, as I rearranged chairs at the center, a girl named Ashanti, 15, brilliant a firecracker with a pen, asked me, "Miss Camille, do you regret it? All that pain. Was it worth it?" I sat beside her, took a breath, and said, "I don't regret being hurt. I regret how long I thought I had to stay silent. But pain is what the system gave me. My voice, my fight, that's what I gave back. So, yes, it was worth it. Because look at you. You're asking the right questions, in the right room." Later that week, I hung something new above the center's front door. It's not a plaque, not a newspaper clipping. It's a single page, the original transcript from my first hearing. The one with the word contempt scribbled beside my name. Only now the word is crossed out. And above it, handwritten in bold ink, voice, because that's what this story was always about. Not revenge, not punishment, but reclamation of truth, of dignity, of power. And as Malachi and I walk home that evening, the sun setting behind the courthouse steps, he asks Mommy, "Do you think they'll remember you?" I smile. They'll remember us. They tried to silence me with a slap, with shame, with fear. But instead, they gave me a voice louder than I ever imagined. This story isn't just about one courtroom, one corrupt judge, or one brave mother. It's about all of us, everyone who's ever been pushed down and told to stay quiet. Justice doesn't start with power. It starts with one person refusing to be invisible. I found my strength not in revenge, but in truth, in community, and in the love of a son who reminded me every day why I couldn't give up. The meaning of life. It's not to live without pain, it's to rise through it and build something better for those who come after. If this story moved, you hit subscribe and turn on the bell to never miss another true, powerful story that speaks for those who've been silenced. Comment below, share your voice, your story, your truth. Because when we speak together, the world listens.